The day my parents kicked me out of the house, my mother handed me a trash bag. Not a suitcase. Not a box. A black plastic trash bag. She stood in the hallway while I stuffed my clothes into it, and my father sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper as if nothing unusual was happening. I was 17 years old. My mother pointed toward the front door. "Your room is going to be rented by Monday." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. My little sister was sitting on the stairs watching me. She didn't say anything. Neither did my father. I remember looking at the house around me and realizing something that hurt more than being kicked out. Nobody was coming after me. Nobody was going to say, "Wait. She's 17." Nobody was going to ask where I would sleep. My mother simply opened the front door. "Your aunt knows you're leaving." That was it. I walked down the driveway carrying 2 trash bags and a backpack. I didn't know it then, but 20 years later, my parents would come back into my life asking me for something. And this time, they wouldn't be standing behind me. They would be standing in front of me, waiting for my verdict. But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand why my parents thought throwing their 17-year-old daughter out of the house was perfectly reasonable. My name is Emily Carter. And growing up, I wasn't the difficult child. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't failing school. I wasn't getting into trouble. I was the child who came home, finished her homework, washed dishes, and stayed quiet when my parents argued. My younger brother, Daniel, was different. Daniel was the favorite. Everyone knew it. He could break something and somehow I would get blamed for not warning him. He could miss school and Dad would call it a phase. When I got an A, Mom would say, "Good. Keep it up." When Daniel passed a class with a C, Dad took him out for pizza. I didn't resent my brother. Not then. I resented the rules. There were rules for me. And there were explanations for him. When I was 16, I started working evenings at a grocery store. I wanted to save for college. My parents told me that was responsible. They also started taking part of my paycheck for household expenses, my father said. I didn't argue. I thought that's what families did. Then, when I was 17, my father lost his job. The mortgage was behind. Bills were piling up. And suddenly my bedroom became valuable. Very valuable. One evening, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. I wasn't supposed to hear them. My father said, "A student will pay $800 a month." My mother replied, "Then Emily needs to go." I froze outside the kitchen. I waited for my father to disagree. He didn't. Instead, he said, "She'll manage." I went into the kitchen. "What do you mean I'll manage?" They both looked at me. My mother didn't even pretend she hadn't been talking about me. "Your father and I need the money. I can get another job. I already have one. Then I'll give you more of my paycheck." My father shook his head. "No." I looked at him. "Then what am I supposed to do?" My mother folded her arms. "Your aunt has a spare room." I laughed because I genuinely thought they were trying to scare me. "You want me to move out?" My father looked down at the table. My mother said, "You're almost 18. I'm 17. You'll be 18 soon." That sentence became the excuse for everything. Soon. Soon you'll be 18. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll be independent. Soon you'll realize we're doing this for the family. But I knew the truth. They weren't asking me to leave. They had already decided. 3 days later, they gave me 24 hours. And then came the trash bags. I packed everything I owned. My school notebooks. My clothes. A photograph of my grandmother. A cheap silver necklace my aunt had given me. And the little wooden jewelry box I'd kept since I was 12. My mother watched from the doorway. Then she said something I didn't understand until years later. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her. "You're kicking me out. We're giving you an opportunity to grow up." "No," I said. "You're giving my room to someone who can pay you rent." Her face hardened. "Watch your attitude." That was the last conversation we had as mother and daughter. At least for a long time. My aunt picked me up that night. I sat in her car with 2 trash bags between my feet. She didn't ask many questions. She simply said, "You can stay with me." I cried the entire way. Not because I was homeless. Not because I was angry. Because some small part of me was still waiting for my father to call. He never did. The following Monday, a college student moved into my bedroom. I found out because my sister posted a photograph online. There was a new desk where mine had been. A new bed. My childhood posters were gone. The caption said, "New roommate." I stared at that photograph for a long time. Then I deleted it. And that was the first thing I learned about survival. Sometimes you have to stop looking at the place that threw you away. My aunt helped me finish high school. I graduated at 18. I worked 2 jobs. I applied for scholarships. And at 19, I left for college. I wasn't extraordinary. I didn't become rich overnight. There was no miracle. There was just work. Lots of it. I studied accounting during the day and worked at a restaurant at night. I slept in a tiny apartment with 2 other students. Sometimes I ate instant noodles for dinner. Sometimes I had $20 left in my bank account. But every month, I saved something. Even if it was only $10. Because I had made myself a promise. I would never again live somewhere where someone could look at me and say, "You're only here because we allow you to be." 20 years passed. 20 years. I graduated. Built a career. Bought a small house. Started my own accounting firm. Got married. Had a daughter. And slowly, without realizing it, I became the person my 17-year-old self needed. Someone who stayed. Someone who didn't threaten to leave. Someone who didn't make love conditional on usefulness. My parents remained distant. There were birthdays. Occasional phone calls. A Christmas card once in a while. But never an apology. Not once. Whenever the subject of what happened came up, my mother had a different version. "You were almost 18. We were struggling. You had somewhere to go. We didn't throw you out. You chose to leave." That last one was my favorite. I chose to leave. For years, I wondered whether I should correct her. Eventually, I stopped. Because people who rewrite the past usually aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for a version they can live with. Then, 20 years after that night, my father called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Emily? Yes. We need to talk. I immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? There was a pause. Your mother and I are selling the house. I didn't feel anything. That surprised me. The house had once represented everything I had lost. Now it was just a house. Then he said, "There's a problem with the tile." I sat down. What kind of problem? We need your signature. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because suddenly the universe had developed a strange sense of humor. My signature? Yes. Why? Another pause. Your name is connected to the property records. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I hadn't lived there since I was 17. My father explained that when my grandfather had died years before, he had left a small ownership interest in the property to his grandchildren. My parents had never told me. The original transfer had never been properly completed. And because I had been a minor at the time, my legal interest had remained attached to the property records. My father wanted me to sign a release. Then I asked the question he clearly didn't expect. What do I get? Silence. Emily, we're your parents. I stared at the phone. There it was. The sentence. The sentence that had controlled my childhood. We're your parents. I answered quietly. And I was your daughter. He didn't respond. I continued. You rented my room when I was 17. We were struggling. You made money from the room I slept in. We didn't have a choice. You had a choice. He sighed. Can we please not go back there? I looked out the window. No, Dad. Because you already did. He hung up. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from an attorney. My parents were asking the court to determine that I had no valid claim to the property and compel me to sign the documents necessary for the sale. It wasn't a huge fortune. The house wasn't worth millions. But it was worth enough that my parents clearly didn't want to lose the sale. And something about the whole situation bothered me. They had spent 20 years saying I had no claim on their home. Now, suddenly, they needed me to confirm that I had no claim. So I hired an attorney. Her name was Rachel Morgan. She reviewed the records. Then she looked at me. Did your parents ever tell you about your grandfather's interest? No. Did they ever ask you to sign anything when you turned 18? No. Did they ever compensate you for your interest? No. She leaned back. Then don't sign anything. The case went to court. My parents arrived together. My mother looked older. My father looked tired. For a moment, I saw the people I remembered. Then I remembered the trash bags. The judge reviewed the documents. My parents' attorney argued that I had abandoned the property. Rachel responded that a 17-year-old child who was removed from a home could hardly be said to have voluntarily abandoned an ownership interest she had never been informed about. The judge asked questions. My father's attorney kept emphasizing that I had not lived there for 20 years. the judge asked. Why would she have been expected to preserve an interest she was never informed existed? The attorney had no good answer. Then my mother was called to testify. She sat in the witness chair. Rachel asked her, Mrs. Carter, did you tell Emily she was being removed from the home because the family needed rental income? My mother hesitated. Then, yes. Did you tell her she could return? No. Did you tell her that she retained an interest in the property? No. Did you ever provide her with any documents regarding the property? No. Rachel looked toward me. Then she asked my mother, Did you believe your daughter understood the financial consequences of what you were doing? My mother looked at me. No. That answer stayed in the room. Because it was the truth. She knew I was 17. She knew I didn't understand property law. She knew I had no idea my grandfather had left me an interest. And she had still sent me away. Then my father's attorney tried something different. He said my parents had provided housing and support for 17 years. That therefore I owed them consideration. I almost smiled. Because that was the argument they had always used. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a room. As though raising a child was a debt that child eventually had to repay. Rachel stood. She placed one document on the judge's desk. It was a rental agreement. The agreement for the student who moved into my bedroom. The monthly rent was written clearly. $800. Then she placed another document beside it. A bank statement. The payments. For 3 years. 36 months. $28,800. My parents had earned nearly $30,000 from renting the room that had been the reason they kicked me out. The courtroom went quiet. My mother stared at the document. My father looked down. Rachel didn't celebrate. She simply said, They didn't remove a child because they had no alternative. She paused. They removed their daughter because her bedroom had become more profitable to them than keeping her at home. That sentence changed the entire atmosphere. Then the judge turned toward my parents. He looked at the property records. He looked at the rental agreement. He looked at the documents from my grandfather's estate. And finally, he looked at me. Then he asked one question. Miss Carter, if the house had never been sold, would you have wanted to live there? I was surprised. I thought about it. Then I answered honestly. No. The judge nodded. My parents looked confused. I continued. I don't want their house. My mother stared at me. I looked at the judge. I want the part of my grandfather's estate that was mine. The judge nodded again. That was my verdict. Not revenge. Not the house. Not making my parents homeless. Just the truth. I wasn't asking for what belonged to them. I was asking for what belonged to me. The judge ruled that my ownership interest was valid. My parents could sell the property, but my share had to be recognized and compensated. They also had to account for the proceeds connected to my interest. The amount wasn't life-changing. But that wasn't the point. My father approached me outside the courtroom. He stood there for several seconds. Then he said, "You really went through with it?" I looked at him. You took me to court. We're your parents. I shook my head. That sentence doesn't mean what you think it means. He looked hurt. But I continued. Being someone's parent doesn't mean they owe you silence. Being someone's child doesn't mean they owe you obedience forever. And being 17 doesn't mean you stop deserving protection. My mother came outside. She had been crying. She said, "I thought you hated us." I answered, "I don't." She looked surprised. "I hated what you did." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Would you have stayed if we'd asked you?" I thought about the 17-year-old girl with 2 black trash bags. Yes. That was the hardest sentence I said that day. Because it was true. I would have stayed. I would have worked. I would have helped. I would have given them everything I earned. All they had to do was let me remain their daughter. Instead, they made me a tenant. And when my room became more valuable than I was, they chose the room. I left the courthouse that afternoon with no celebration. No champagne. No photograph. I went home to my daughter. She was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up. "Mom, how did court go?" I smiled. "It went okay." She asked, "Did you win?" I thought about the question. Then I said, "I got what was mine." She smiled. "That's good." "Yes," I said. "It is." That night, after she went to bed, I opened the old wooden jewelry box I had carried out of my parents' house 20 years earlier. Inside was my grandmother's photograph, the silver necklace, and a small folded piece of paper. I had forgotten it was there. I opened it. It was something my aunt had written the night she picked me up. 3 words. "You are wanted." I started crying. Not because I was sad. Because for 20 years, I had believed the most important thing about that night was that my parents had thrown me out. It wasn't. The most important thing was that someone opened a door. Someone said, "You can stay." Someone showed me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about who made room for you. 20 years later, my parents finally learned something I had spent my entire adult life understanding. You cannot treat someone's love like a rental agreement. You cannot evict a person from your life and expect them to come running back when you need their signature. And you cannot rewrite abandonment as independence simply because the truth makes you uncomfortable. My parents had once looked at my bedroom and seen $800 a month. I looked at that same room years later and saw something completely different. A 17-year-old girl who thought she wasn't worth keeping. And if I could go back to that night, I wouldn't tell her that everything would be perfect. I wouldn't promise she'd become successful. I wouldn't tell her that one day a judge would rule in her favor. I'd tell her something much simpler. You are not disposable. Because that was the verdict that mattered most. Not the money. Not the property. Not the courtroom. The real verdict came 20 years earlier, the moment I walked away carrying those trash bags. I decided that whatever happened next, I would build a life where nobody had to earn the right to stay. Today, I still have the photograph my grandmother gave me. I still have the necklace. And I still have the note from my aunt. You are wanted. I keep all 3 together. Because they remind me of the three things my childhood taught me. What people take from you isn't always what they think they've taken. What people deny you doesn't determine your worth. And sometimes the family that saves you isn't the family you were born into. It's the family that opens the door when someone else closes it. My parents wanted my signature 20 years after they had decided my presence was worth less than rent. Instead, they got my answer. Calm. Simple. And final. No. Not because I wanted to punish them. Because I had finally learned that protecting yourself isn't revenge. Sometimes. It's simply the verdict. If you've ever been treated like you were only valuable when you were useful, tell me in the comments. I am not disposable. And if this story reminded you that family should be the place where someone makes room for you, not the place where they calculate what you're worth, subscribe to Calm Verdict Stories. Because here, we don't need screaming to find justice. Sometimes the truth only needs a courtroom. And one calm verdict.